Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday stream. 3 guests today. We have, no, other side. I always have to do this in reverse. Boff and Caro and Brockett, say hello.
Greetings.
Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Okay, so topic today, and as always, if you would like to ask me a comment or one of the other guys, or just relay your thoughts on the subject we're talking about, put 3 smiley faces or 3 yellow emojis, 3 circles before your question so I can see them here in the stream. Alternatively, super chat me during the stream and I'll definitely see that because it pops up very prominently. And I wanted to talk about following up from last week where I talked about, let me see. It's a similar topic to last week, but I wanted to talk about it in a very particular way. Where last week's stream was, are you in a one-sided conversation? And this week, I would like to kind of expand on that in terms of arguing with an unreasonable person, which would probably be a one-sided conversation as well. And quite rightly, a lot of people say, well, you should just cut your losses. You're intelligent enough to sort of realize if someone's very close-minded, and I understand it. But I realized why, not that I fight against it, but why I think it's a great liberating point to understand why there's no point arguing with very unreasonable people. It's because what I recognize is a lack of openness. And I used to have this kind of fight with my own internal dialogue, trying to have a conversation with a stubborn side of myself that wouldn't change how I thought. So this is where it comes from with me. So yes, you can leave people, but what the representation is to me is your inability to get better, move past old pain, grow, all of that sort of stuff. I realized why it bugged me, and I knew I'm much more grounded and more intelligent than the spur guy was, say, 10 years ago. But kind of why does it bug me? It's because I don't want to have conversations with people that are like the old me where I was very rigid. And there's a comment I relayed last week from Aristotle, and the comment was, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. And what I realized was why narrow-minded people bugged me, or parts of the Manosphere that won't see past their ideological, religious talking points. And I can't say, well, I agree with you to an extent, but let's with evidence, with my evidence that's outside your boundaries, let me describe why I'm still reasonable. I'm not blindly doing it. I'm doing this reasonably. I'm dating a girl. Like, not all women are like what you say. The general women out there, if I blindly just pick any woman, yeah, the chances are that 95% of them will be exactly what you say. Virtually all women are like that. Why it bugs me, narrow-minded conversation, especially if you're trying to talk reasonably outside of their parameters, outside of their religious, manosphere group, political, whatever it might be, is it bugs me because being able to evaluate different values without necessarily adopting them is perhaps the central skill required in changing one's own life in a meaningful way. I can't have an edifying, open conversation where I benefit, they might benefit, and we might go further if we're both closed-minded. What do you guys think?
I think a lot of the problem is that most people don't want to admit a part of their dogma is maybe wrong, because then it calls the rest of it all into question. And so they stick with it, and they just won't change their mind on it just because of that fear that they may be believing in something that's flawed.
Yeah, I think that's with you guys, we can give differing points of view. And a good example is Karu always looks at things from different angles, which makes for an interesting conversation, yet we can get along and enjoy talking with each other. And it's almost like these people are either so fragile or clinging so hard to the life raft of their religious talking points, figuratively speaking, that they worry that they'll drown if they look at it from a different angle. I just see a lot of brittleness in that. And again, not everyone needs to be as brave or as open-minded as I think, but I think that's where it comes from with me. Why I find it very hard to talk to most people, and that's natural. You get older, you get very, very kind of narrow in your view. But I think making the most out of life as you get narrower and narrower and know yourself, which is great, having some flexibility will do you well. Otherwise, you kind of calcify getting older, and that's kind of something you don't want to do.
Not necessarily. There's also the inbuilt assumption that people have the capacity or the will to change. And a lot of the times, the easiest solution that people find is the one that they gravitate to. And imposing to someone or giving them an alternative that requires a lot more effort is just something that they will never do.
Yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable in your life, why fix what's not broken? I mentioned it in a recent video. That's fine. But when a blind person can see that this person's frustrated and they're kind of talking about a problem which they won't put down the tool that won't fix it. They won't even entertain the notion of picking up a different tool in conversation. It's kind of frustrating. And you said it last night, Karu, the only thing you can do is walk away because you have better ways to spend your time. It's pointless.
Yes, but even if they're frustrated, the frustration is still a lot easier than the solution. And that's the crux of the issue. Yeah, I'm frustrated, I'm miserable, but it's still better than putting in some effort. Look at the whole round people movement that now seem to inhabit most of the planet. What's easier, to be round and complain about being round all of the time, or going to the gym 3 times a week?
Yeah, a familiar problem's better than an uncomfortable solution.
Yes.
I think
Go ahead, Boffin.
I think another issue too is ego investment. People live their lives, they accumulate what they think are the best choices and the best perspectives on things. And it's particularly noticeable in old people who tend to be very inflexible and very dogmatic in their opinions and their outlooks on the world. And I think that's just a natural thing. I think you have to be very conscious of the fact that you're becoming stagnant in your understanding of the world, your viewpoints, and the way you communicate with people. And I think it's a natural tendency for a lot of people. They think that they've lived their life. They think they've learned all of this stuff. They think they've accumulated wisdom, and it's a little bit different in today's world. When Rocket and I were young, and probably you too, Human, there were definitely noticeable. There was a noticeable collection of people who were very dogmatic, very staid in their opinions and their viewpoints, and a lot of times they weren't shy about sharing them.
Something you mentioned at the start of what you just said, I'd never really thought about like directly, that part of the virtues that men hold high and everyone else really appreciates is our loyalty to our word and our, fellow man and things like that, being able to trust us to go forward with what we promised and all of that. You just need to look at history and wars and things like that. And that loyalty, I never thought about the connection between men's loyalty to an ideal. So you're loyal to discovering a religion or a friend or something, and then you won't let it go because it's a virtue not to let go of something you valued. You don't just throw it away for no good reason. And you fight anyone trying to take it away from you in conversation as well. You won't. It's kind of like a loyal thing. Like this saved me in the past. It made sense. This talking point, this way of thinking, this philosophy, this ethic, and this is mine, and no one's taking it away from me. And it's something that we innately cling to, that loyalty. And so someone trying to take that away from you seems something you should fight against. And it's very hard to counterintuitively, especially as a man. Whereas you look at typically women, they have no problem shopping, dropping this thing, loving it 1 minute, and next week shopping for something else, getting rid of friends much more easily than men typically do. So I wonder if is that inbuilt loyalty thing to even ideas, and how hard it is to entertain something else, to drop the old thing and go with something new.
I think that's a characteristic, even in the men's community. If you listen to men talk, men respect the idea that other men are true to their word. They're consistent. You can always go back to the guy that you've established a relationship with, and he's not flighty. So I think what you said is very true. Men, I think, instinctively respect a man who's stable in his opinions, and that can work to his detriment as well if he's blindly dogmatic to a particular viewpoint. But I think men in general, and probably a lot of women, also admire that trait in a man: consistency.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that makes it hard for a person to philosophically, makes it hard for a man in particular to philosophically move forward because of his loyal adherence to something that's been with him for a long time, that works, an ethic, an ideal. And it's really hard to kind of abandon that. Like men don't like abandoning, like even your books, like you loved a book for a certain period of time and you put it on the shelf and it meant something to you and you might not ever read it again, but you would never throw it away. But logically, there's no reason why you shouldn't if it's just taking up space. But we don't. We have a car that we keep in the garage that we'd never drive anymore because it meant something when we were younger, or it was our father's car or something. We hoard a lot for the sake of loyalty, and especially conceptual or philosophical loyalty. I think a lot of guys find it really hard to change their philosophy and better themselves. Any of you guys, other guys, have any thoughts on that?
Maybe that's part of the problem with the Manospheres. Early on, there was just some simple concepts, and they were valid, and so people really believed, wow, this is the right way to think and the right direction to go. And later on, as it became a populist type of philosophy, and all these other things got added in, people kind of just went along with it. Well, these must all be right too, and therefore, you shall not pass here. And I think they have a hard time letting go. When originally the concepts themselves were all new and you had to change the way you think to even accept them, where did that type of thinking go as the Manosphere grew and aged a little bit? It's like all of a sudden it became more like a religion than a round table of men discussing their experiences and ideas and solutions.
Well, sure. And look, I still say that, if not the core values and the central talking points, basically the campfire of what the Manosphere has always been around, the foundations, they're always going to be useful and ontologically true. But the discussion around them now has been kind of warped, and it's almost a completely different type of discussion. It doesn't expand anymore, and it becomes sort of an echo chamber that's not in that kind of philosophical or scientific sense, able to be questioned and built upon, you know, a library to be built and expanded outward. It's kind of like, no, we just read from the same book over and over again, and we look at ways to pick up chicks and hold microphones up to chicks on the street and ask them their opinion, as though that's actually building a library. It's basically a different animal. It's a reality TV show now. It's not those more intellectual talk shows that we were used to seeing when we were younger, like not necessarily Donahue, but you know those ones where they used to have writers and philosophers, they come up and they sit across from the host and they would be talking about life in a very meaningful way and trying to find really interesting solutions and things like that. Now it's just three men on one side, three women on another side. It's kind of like a dating show where if they're not trying to pick each other up, they're trying to antagonize each other and win. So it's the whole manosphere has become very, very different. But I would still say that the core tenets, the jumping off point, maybe like religion, there's a lot of truth there that gets you through the door. But then once you're sold on it, you're kind of taken advantage of in other ways without it even being a plan of doing so. You know, you find yourself invested and going all in and you can't leave. And then the loyalty to the group of guys, the friends that they're always there, you talk to, they remind you that you're all on the same page. But the kind of the trick is you're all on this kind of loop, same page. So say you just got divorced and your wife took everything. You find a pocket of the manosphere, all of a sudden people are listening to you, you're not alone. Everything starts to make sense about women's nature, blind things you didn't notice about what you picked in the past, but then now you do, you have experience, and you're kind of recycling, like, you know, high school friends, old war stories, what happened in the past, and you kind of stay there. The relationship you have with your friends in the manosphere is like a frozen moment of catching up with old high school buddies, and you talk about the same things all the time. It's a frozen Groundhog Day about talking about the good old days. But in this case, you're not talking about the good old days. You're talking about the liberation moment of this happened to me and then I was free and now I can see.
You know, to bump the conversation a little bit different direction, I'm out and about quite a bit, being retired, so I interact with a lot of people, and I notice that I catch myself when I'm talking to people who I know are going to have an opinion that they're not going to change and they're not going to discuss it. The body language is giveaway almost all the time. When you ask them, like, well, why do you think like that? They'll look away or they'll cross their arms or something like that, and you know right there, oh, okay, I can see that this is going in a direction of an argument and not a discussion. And on a personal note, my ex-wife was a lot like that. If I pushed her on an issue, I would get the crossed arms or an ultimatum, which was what eventually ended everything. But their body language shifts right away, as if, okay, now this isn't, now you're questioning my values, and so they lock right up, and you tend to drop conversations right there and change the subject just because of the body language of people who don't really like to discuss their what they think is important.
Yeah, there's very little you can do when you know that someone's just locked the vault between you and them in terms of leave it open so you can see my point of view and I can see yours. So in effect, we can see each other in terms of what we're talking about. But it's kind of useless when you notice that they're so close-minded that there is no. You either have to come all the way to their end and live in their world, or as the Manosphere says, their frame, as they want women to sort of be. But the only way you will actually know who they are is both of you kind of lower that guard and have that kind of free-flowing tennis match between you. And again, I would stress to guys that doing it with yourself is the first step. not having that very close-minded conversation with yourself and thinking you know what left and right is, yet you're frustrated with a lot, especially a lot of your interactions with, women and dating and jobs and the world and things like that. The thing is to be open-minded so that you can actually grow and get out of the old philosophy. And then when you start doing that, and then you start recognizing the closed-mindedness in someone else, if you don't recognize it in yourself, you fight and debate people like I see on the Fresh and Fit shows. But when you're not doing it to yourself, you've got more of an ability not to debate and fight some dumb bimbo on a date or some boss trying to strong-arm you. You recognize what the conversation now is because you're used to talking to yourself better and more open-mindedly. And then you can walk away from this rather than trying to win the discussion, rather than trying to turn the wrong woman into your wife. Sorry, go ahead.
But precisely everything you've discussed so far, even with the description that you've had earlier, with the books that you like, or the car that was left to you from your father, and so on and so forth, everything is rigidity. And it may not be the kind of rigidity that most people would appreciate because they have different forms of investment or sentimental value attached to them, but they're still forms of rigidity. And if we're genuinely honest about what's going on beyond our little circle, the world is always in flux, whether we like it or not. Picture a world where body counts, for example, keep going up and up and up and up. And if you're going to reach a point where the minimum body count that you're going to encounter out there is going to be, let's say, at least 10, you're going to have to make a choice of, well, I'm not going to date anyone, or I'm going to have to deal with a number that's at least as low as 10 and as high as whatever. And to me, that is the main issue of the discussion, because I think it was Bruce Lee who said, you need to be water, my friend. And that type of malleability, I think, is the most important, or one of the most important traits that one can have. While appreciating some of the things that you have in your past, but also being willing to let them go, realizing that they either no longer fit with the environment or the times, or they were quaint little things that you used to enjoy when you were younger. I mean, if we were still kids, we'd probably still enjoy eating chocolate and playing with cats or with a stick in the ditch or whatever else. But that time has passed. Would it be fun to still go outside and play in the ditch? Maybe not. But the thing is, you need to be honest with where you are, what's going on around you, the ideologies that are currently present, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, you can just be a walking relic. It doesn't matter how much you value the things that are in your life, or the past ideals, or everything else. That's just not the world that you're living in right now. And it's about both your comfort, but also about your success. Because you can cling on to old values and be miserable for the rest of your life. Or you can find a happy medium between the things that you like and maybe incorporate some of the things that don't make you as comfortable, but be able to live relatively decently.
Yeah, this is a very important thing. It's great to have very high ideals, but if they're completely unrealistic, that they can't actually interact with the world, they're not practical in any way, but you can hold them up theoretically to your friends and saying, like, I respect myself so much that my values are here. But those values would only be practical maybe in the 1940s. That's kind of like the unicorn to me, because they're not transferable to the world. You can't handshake that with you can't handshake it with anyone out there in a reasonable fashion. You are going to be sort of wandering a desert trying to apply your ridiculous values. Now, like you mentioned about the body count, there's a difference between the practicality of your boundaries and your values, but if what they are really is just an excuse so you don't have to try or interact with people, and you can use this sort of BS excuse that my values are so high, it kind of reminds me of some of the women that people rightly make fun of, that some, I don't know, some woman that's my age that's still looking for the 10 out of 10 young guy with a six-pack who's a multi-billionaire. It's like, well, I've got high standards, but it's not applicable to the world and who you are and your environment and your surroundings and your social group. So I was talking with Stephanie last night just briefly about what some people hold as objective values that everyone should go for. Like you mentioned body count. Some guys say she's got to be a master chef. She's got to be this and this. And then we started talking about what we really respect and were drawn to each other in terms of values. And it was almost none of the things that everyone says that you should actually value. And if you get that, marry her. And it's like, generally, yeah, but conversation, trustworthiness, like all these kind of really important things that made me decide to pick her to the exclusion of everyone else. All of the other stuff is, for me, standards by which you can blindly, almost in a blind date setup, someone give you someone on paper and you don't care about compatibility, what kind of temperament they have, if they're kind, if they're an introvert, an extrovert, what kind of interests they have in relation to yours. Do they like, are they outgoing? Are they a homebody? None of those. So we just talked about all the things that we really value in each other. And it was like virtually nothing that the dating gurus put up as, if your partner doesn't have this, red flag, do not even touch them, they're radioactive. And it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's unsurprising. I think that the only genuine thing that you should look for is someone that you need, or someone that brings you peace, or ideally both. The rest is just fluff. It doesn't really matter.
Look, you don't really need anyone. Let's be honest. What's welcome is someone that doesn't make you compromise who you are, how you live. They basically integrate in a similar kind of lifestyle, or a lifestyle that you genuinely want to move towards. I
didn't mean need in the sense of a physical object. Yes, I need this, and without it, I can't leave my life. But more along the lines of I feel like I'm being completed by this other person. They understand me. They don't make my life harder, essentially.
I just want to read out some comments by you guys in the stream, as maybe you guys can ponder some more talking points while I read them out. Mecca Medina said, someone once told me that most people can't think beyond their own nose and their felt truth. I feel many people are unreasonable, not because they are stupid or evil, but rather they are selfish. This is a very good point. Like, whatever you feel is important, you spend your time debating to hold on to what you feel is right, or gives you a good endorphin rush. Big Ol said, one of the hardest lessons I've learned over the last 5 years is that not everyone can be reasoned with. If someone doesn't value logic, what argument can you give them to value logic? Fitfinger says, well, I suppose the bigger question is how someone can grow into a life with such strong conviction that they fear being challenged. Why would they fear another perspective? Big Ol also says, I've noticed that those who don't think critically when faced with criticism will immediately resort to aggression. Shut up, you're unreal. Often thinking and yelling is whining in an argument. I've been there. The Crummy VCR says, intellectual honesty is an art form. If values are static, then your understanding of anything else is as well by principle. Very few people can understand this concept and practice. Tragic, really. Yes. Your thoughts, Boffin? Or Rocket?
I just wanted to touch real quickly on the point that Karu made a few minutes ago. I think a lot of people in today's world, I think this is one of the big issues that uh, a lot of people in today's world struggle with. How do you hang on to the things that you view as being very important, kind of core to your belief system, while at the same time adapting to the modern world? I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially as they get older. You know, young people. I think the general perception with most young people, all young people probably, is that the way that I have become aware of the world is the way that the world has always been. And then as you grow older, you develop perspective, and you understand that, you know, the world is constantly changing. But I think a lot of people struggle with the notion of trying to hang on to what they know, or at least feel like are very important core values, moral values, um, things that make your life successful and fulfilling, while at the same time trying to adapt to the ever changing environment.
Sure,
But are they?
just quickly, the human being requires security, but it also requires a level of insecurity to let go of your previous, or at least loosen the grip of your previous conviction to be able to entertain something else. I see it as like climbing up a rope. You find something like a philosophy that's like a light bulb, you grab onto it, you pull yourself up, but to go up any further, you got to let go and entertain like grabbing up further. You can't just kind of hold on to that position and stay there. That's survival to me. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Karu.
Well, the question that I would ask often is, are the things you talked about truly core values for these people, or are they just things that they copy pasted from a YouTube video, or from their parents or their grandparents, or so on and so forth? Because chances
Hon-
are, if you go
yeah,
ahead.
honestly, Karu, I think it's a combination of all of the above. I don't know how people accumulate the things that they want to hang on to. But however it happens, it does happen with all people. We collect all of this stuff as we learn to interpret the world. And some of the stuff we hold on to tenaciously, we just don't want to let go, whether it's, a religious belief or a social belief or a cultural belief. And some of the stuff we're more flexible on, and that varies from person to person. But I can't answer that question. I think different people collect those near and dear beliefs in a number of ways we can't imagine.
Well, I agree that it's a combination of both the environment you grew up in and where you reside at the moment. I think it's still important to have a certain grip on reality. If you lived your entire life in a very rural area in a village of maybe 100 or 200 people, you may feel very maladapted if you have to move to the big city, and then you find environments that are where even the more conservative part of the city is going to be way more liberal than you'll ever be. But then if you do make that change and you do go to a big city, to me at least, it's a bit unreasonable to then start complaining about, oh, look at how all the city folk are acting. Well, you're not exactly adapted to the place where you're in right now. It's natural that there are going to be so many things that are different from where you grew up and where you were versus the place where you are now. And I think that that's something that happens very often when you're constantly bombarded with internet videos of the worst sewage that you can possibly imagine and the worst types of behavior and the ditziest people that you can imagine. It's easy to distort reality when that's all you're exposed to.
You know, you bring up a very good point about environment, and I lived in very large cities for many years, and I also worked with large teams of employees in engineering, and part of part of that environment is being able to adapt to quickly changing technology and quickly changing ideas. You know, you may have a great idea today, but tomorrow it could possibly be just totally outdated, and you kind of adapted to that. When I moved back to the country where I live out in the sticks now, there isn't a lot of change. As a matter of fact, when I moved back here 20 years ago, it was exactly the way I had left it 45 years previously. So, um, and I could understand in that type of environment why opinions would change. People would be less adapting and probably more structured in their beliefs and believing that, well, this is the way it always is, so this must be right, and any other ideas are probably wrong. So I think environment has a lot to do with it. And as Boffin brought up earlier, ego. People will people who are very confident in their abilities, I believe, more openly will listen to other people's ideas than people who aren't confident in their abilities to adapt or, um, even their intellectual ability. They understand their limitations, so they don't like change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a difference I've started to notice for a while now between someone who's proud and knows who they are in relation to a belief or how they feel or how they relate to something, like who they are and what they want or who they love or why they love doing something, to the degree to which they're triggered and need to defend it and need to debate you and convince you that they're right. So it's kind of like, if I've used the example, if someone were to challenge me and say, well, let me debate you whether or not you love your friend or your family or something, I would laugh because I know how I feel about it. I'm confident and sure. I don't really need to prove it to you, and it's laughable. Whereas other people who talk and they debate and they defend themselves and they want to convert you to their way of thinking, and they want to silence you because you're wrong and they're right. To me, they're sure in a way that they're hanging off a cliff and they're holding on really tight, and it's kind of like a defensive survival thing. They have to be right. They can't be open-minded. And Big Ol left a comment here that I agree with. He said, literally, my number one requirement in a girl is being reasonable. From there, anything's possible. Any argument is resolved, well, maybe not, but is more likely to be resolved because you both agree on logic and the tools of critical thinking. But also, I think that being reasonable allows you to always leave that door open to a degree or another of being sympathetic to the other person's point of view, not holding on rigidly to like, I'm right, only my perspective matters. You can accommodate another, and therefore it allows them to kind of lower their guard and see your point of view. But if you're so rigid that it's all about your frame, then the other person quite rightly defends themselves in a survival sense. It's like, no, it's me against you. And you're kind of just trying to get along by absorbing the person rather than relating to them.
Kind of going back to what Rocket and Carew both mentioned a few minutes ago. I think when you're engaged with someone that is being unreasonable, or you perceive them as being unreasonable, there could be a number of different reasons for that. But I think there are people in the world that really struggle. The whole ability to adapt and change and integrate new things and kind of converse on the fly to process new ideas. I really think that's kind of the minority of people in the population. I think the average person is more apt to kind of develop a script over the course of their lifetime that they become comfortable and familiar with. So when you think you're having a conversation with them, I think in reality they're just looking something up on the script and reading it back to you. So there's not a whole lot of
Yeah.
conversing going on. It's really more of a recitation.
But like with everything, you need a bit of balance between rigidity and being reasonable. You don't want somebody to be too reasonable because taking Biggles' comment as an example, if your girl's too reasonable, she can always be convinced by Chad to carry his offspring because he's a better genetic specimen than you are. And there's probably a good way to picture that argument and to find someone that actually fits that bill. So you need a bit of both pieces of poison in your life, because otherwise any extreme won't lead to any good result.
Well, that's also another case for initially when you meet someone, this is a thing. Everyone's so unreasonable dating today. It really should be, you should be the most reasonable and open on the first dates to find out which subjects the person is very reasonable on and which subjects they're very rigid on. And we would agree, a girl being very reasonable in accepting any kind of views and entertaining them as even just fantasies and creative thought is fine. But most guys who are looking for long-term or wanting to have a family would really respect a woman who's very close-minded and unreasonable about cheating. She just doesn't like it. She hates it. And she's very close-minded when it comes to that. That's actually a good quality. So the point is to actually be completely reasonable at the start, completely as open as you can be in a discussion sense, in showing who you are, and actually delve into where are you completely rigid, i.e. your boundaries and values, and where are you very open and creative and take risks and open-minded and things like that. So it's where someone is rigid and where someone is open-minded. And there's positives and negatives for both.
That's true. I was dating a girl a few weeks back that regular conversation, interaction, just going out, having a good time, whatever. Just a wonderful person. But if you got on a serious subject and started debating it, she went off the deep end and would get loud and just ridiculous. Whereas a young lady I was seeing today, anything is open for discussion. There's no raising of voice. It's just discussed, and she wants to hear your point, and she'll give you her point, and she actually tries to win the argument using logic, which I can agree with. Show me where I'm wrong, and I'll back down. It's surprising when you find people like that. You tend to cherish them, just like when you find a group of guys that can have a discussion without going off the deep end. You tend to hang on to them, and I think there's less and less people like that in the world nowadays, and a lot of it has to do with environment. I mean, look at every show on TV. They're all screaming at each other.
Yeah, I feel like we were much more intellectually open generations ago simply because we were so rigid when it came to love and relationships. And now we're so open with everything that our sense of security, we're just grabbing on tight everywhere and strangling everything.
I think you gave a good illustration, Newman, of you want a girl who is absolutely disgusted by the idea of cheating. I think that's a good illustration of one of those core values that you want to make sure someone possesses. And there's going to be a different checklist of those core values for each person that is looking for a relationship. But that's a good concrete example of the difference between hanging on to those important core values versus things that you need to adapt to in the ever-changing world.
Yeah, it's not a black and white, like you're completely open-minded in every, like Karu mentioned,
Right.
like how open-minded, then like you can't have a monogamous future planning, trustworthy relationship with them because they're so flexible. And it goes beyond, like in real life, they're flexible with everything. They'll jump from one person to another. they'll never be on your side and defend you. Someone could be attacking you in public, and she doesn't care. And you ask her, like, why were you agreeing with the other person? Well, they have a point. It's not always what you think, human. It's like, well, come on. Like, I thought, you don't have to agree with my point of view, but you don't have to join the crowd all the time. You don't have to be so fluid that everything is reasonable. Like, you can't always talk on both sides of the fence and be nothing. You can't be the world. You have to be something. But especially the values that would create trust between two people, those should be on the same page, and actually should be in a lot of ways very close-minded. But in a lot of the other ways, it makes it even harder when someone's so close-minded in every aspect of life. It just kind of narrows the hallway of being able to find anyone, even to talk to, let alone to be with romantically or anything. If you're that specific that you really just need a mirror. There was a comment by Derpa Lipa. Thank you for the super chat. They said part of holding an old value system is recognizing aspects are non-negotiable. At some point, I'm forced to rub the rest of the world the wrong way. Adapting to a hedonistic or careless world is death. Yeah, true. Again, we just need to be flexible enough to know where we can be open-minded. It's not going to really deteriorate our lives, and our foundations are going to be fine. And then where there's the line you cross into, this is going to change my world, this is going to force me to become somebody else. And I don't think a lot of people know their values between any of them. Like, you're completely hedonistic and everything is whatever, or you're completely right-wing and you're very rigid and too old-fashioned for it to be applied to the world. Let's go through some other comments. Luke, wait for it, Marengo said, unless you don't know about the characteristics of said person, you essentially bring the stress and annoyance into yourself by trying to reason with them. For example, knowing not to touch the hot stove, touching it anyway, and then complaining you got burnt. Xanthopus 9079 says, intelligence is not applied at all times, lest you burst your brain with fatigue, nor in every subject. Even geniuses are not immune from having biases or personality traits that cause them to be unreasonable. Yeah, I remember my physics professor in high school, someone asked him, do you believe in God? And he did, and it was basically like two personalities. He couldn't form a conversational bridge between the two. And it was a funny class because he had to switch hats between being the physics professor and then being the personal guy with family and church and everything like that. And he was like a very different person. Like he there was no language bridge between the two. And yeah, that's a tricky one. David P. says, they can't possibly fathom that an opinion different from their own exists. A typical response I've heard is, you just don't understand, as a way to put me down. No, I don't understand. I just disagree. Alex Duda says, stubbornness would be my short answer. Yeah, that could probably be the short answer for all of this, is a person being stubborn and unable to sort of entertain anything else. It's kind of like someone who's never traveled the world and rejects everything, any story you tell them about a different point of view or a different culture or something you've heard or discovered somewhere else. I know most of this guys would be thinking about in relation to exes and old friends and relationships they have with other people. And I know with myself that when I look back on it, a lot of it was my, not just stubbornness, lack of experience, but when you don't know how to understand their rigidity, you're defensive in your own rigidity, And if you both don't know how to communicate, it's kind of like an impasse. Like, how do you, aside from walking away, which most people would, and why shouldn't you? It's a logical thing to do. I think when you know better, and if you've learned from your mistakes, you're less likely to just walk away unless you know everything's been exhausted. So, as I mentioned at the start, my wanting to do this stream was just to further the idea, not just that being in a one-sided conversation, not being able to build a bridge between people, but what it actually means. If you can't be reasonable with yourself, you can't actually move past your problems. You're going to kind of circle back and keep using philosophical tools and pluck out of the pigeonhole very witty memes from somebody else to make you feel better, but you're not actually solving anything. You're essentially using memes and witty sayings while you're burning at the moment, and you're pouring them over you like cold water, but very quickly it's going to dissolve and you're going to need more cold water in the forms of witty memes and gurus and things like that, because you're not really solving your problems. You're standing still, just wanting to be doused with cold water to make yourself feel better momentarily. And I say that if we can stop being stubborn and unreasonable ourselves, that's going to help us be better and solve our problems, rather than circularly talking in sort of bubbles on the internet about all the problems out there. And so that first step of being more reasonable with yourself and not taking what dating gurus say about all women and all men, but really looking at what you want, that'll help you be more reasonable in approaching solutions to your own life. Because a lot of these black and white things, they're not solutions. They're basically, well, if it's not this, then it's the other. And it forces you not to try and handshake with anything else. It forces you not to try again. So I wanted to really revisit this point, because it goes back to yourself first. If you're not being reasonable yourself and open to fixing things by having open conversations and revisiting things in new ways, not rigid old ways, not rigid old conversations in your own head, you can't actually really do it that well with people outside of you going forward. It's a bunch of closed-minded people with their own Bible internally fighting against each other. Terrence Mason, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts, guys? Or did I just kind of veer off topic?
Well, just to muddy the discussion a little bit, I think we should probably also touch on the topic of what constitutes reasonableness and unreasonableness, because I think they can both be relative ideas. And I'll give you a silly example that I was thinking of. Let's say that your wife has a little toy poodle, and she wants you to kiss the dog on the nose when you leave the house. And she gets very agitated because you won't kiss the little dog on the nose. And this is her precious little pet. And she looks at you and thinks you're being very unreasonable. It's a simple request. I just want you to kiss this most precious little thing in the world to me in the world. I just want you to give him a little kiss before you leave. Who is the unreasonable person in that situation? and I think a lot of times, what constitutes unreasonableness is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I guess. What do the rest of you guys think?
I think we need a study on the topic. We need it to be peer reviewed, and the Manosphere should revise it a couple of times, and then they can tell us.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what the answer is. It's whatever you choose to do and not to do.
What? Yeah, Boffin, what if the little toy is in the bedroom?
Well, there's also, like, you might say, well, okay, she's a great person, and this is her own little uncomfortable request for me. I don't want to do it. It's embarrassing. But as long as I don't have to do it in public, that might be reasonable to you. But if she expects you to do it in public as she's holding it in her hand at a cafe and in front of friends, then that's your line. But if she wants you to call her a cute name or kiss the little poodle on the nose, you have to decide your reasonable and unreasonable line that is crossed or not crossed, where your boundaries are. So again, there is no objective line, and I think most people would. There's a sensible range of being reasonable, I would say, if you talk to anyone. In private, that's kind of a different story. But I do think there should be more of a reasonable external standard that most people would say, yeah, that's kind of okay. Or if it is, it's really up to the individual to choose if it's reasonable or not, but everyone would see it as not freakish or not really, really odd that they would be ostracized, you know?
I believe that the circumstances would make Boffin's opinion change. If I was holding the puppy and held it out, he would not kiss it. If I was a busty blonde holding the puppy, he probably would.
That's very true, Rocket. These are situational things, and it's actually, if you think about it just a little bit, couples argue about the silliest things, and they will dig their heels in, and both of them will point to the other and say, he's being unreasonable or she's being unreasonable.
Yeah.
So these are things that happen in the real world all the time. And the outsider looking in may look at both of them and say, well, you're both being ridiculous. None of this is reasonable to me. But these are the types of things that really get people emotional. They get charged up, and they can't turn loose.
Well, it's true. Like I would be much more reasonable with Stephanie as I would a stranger on the street. It often depends on who you trust more or who you give more rope to or how much more reason. I think there's a general reasonableness, but talking particularly in your personal life, last night Karu relayed a story where there was a person in his private life that he would convey advice to, and they would completely be pushing it back and wouldn't consider it. But if another person said exactly the same thing, because they either find them more attractive or appealing or they trust them more, it's like, oh, you're a genius. I never thought of it that way. And, right. You're saying, I just said that same thing to you 5 minutes ago and you rejected me. You weren't You're not reasonable to me. You're reasonable to the other person that said exactly the same thing.
But to be fair, Boffin, in that example, there's only one reasonable solution. And that is to kiss that little dog with more love and affection than you ever kissed your wife, and then tell the little dog you want to see him tonight, and then look at your wife suffer.
Yeah. Be competitive with how much you love the dog. I love your dog more than you do. You mentioned something, because I asked the question in the community. My specific question was, sometimes you talk to a seemingly intelligent person and they cannot entertain anything outside of their principles. Or put another way, why are some intelligent people so unreasonable? And you made a good point when we talked last night, Karu, that you sort of said intelligence is just processing power. Could you sort of elaborate on more on what you said there? Because I thought that was really kind of spot on.
Well, intelligence is just a measure of processing power, pattern recognition, and mathematical ability, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's a bit more complex than that. But just being hyper focused or hyper intelligent in one domain doesn't mean that it applies uniformly to every little aspect of your life. you can be an extremely intelligent and smart mathematician. That doesn't mean that you're the same skills and the same things that you have will automatically apply to art or drawing or everything else. Though a lot of people that do reach a high level in any field kind of have the false interpretation that because they're successful, everything that they do is right and that they have the proper opinion.
Yeah, I mean, they might have a high processing power in terms of their intelligence, but they're processing garbage or something that's like completely irrational or doesn't make sense. So it doesn't matter how fast and strong you can process. I've often thought that, yeah, I could pluck a sort of someone with 180 IQ and they're a mathematician, but if I was stranded on a desert island, they might actually be useless as a person, even if they can process information in a specific way. It's kind of like having a supercar that they can process fuel really well, but if you introduce peanut butter, the whole thing stands still. They can't accept it.
Well, look at go ahead, Rocket.
Just because a person is extremely intelligent doesn't mean they give good advice. They may not have wisdom to temper their intelligence to give good advice.
And it's not just that. If you look at modern colleges, usually the most intelligent people are part of the sciences. And within the sciences, it's usually the physics professor that kind of are in the top of the IQ ladder. And how many times have you met a physics professor or a math professor that's just a social retard? They can't even speak to people properly. A lot of the times they can't even present the material that they have properly. They don't know how to conduct themselves. Yeah, they're amazing at physics. That doesn't mean that they're going to be a good mechanic. And yeah, they have a lot of processing power. Good for them. They're hyper intelligent, but that doesn't mean that everything else is going to be fine.
It reminds me of that character that Russell Crowe played in A Beautiful Mind. Very intelligent, but socially completely disconnected and almost unable to relate to people and fit in.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Kuru. I think it's another one of those interesting paradoxes of life. A lot of times, very intelligent people also struggle with social skills. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But I think, anyone that's encountered anyone that's, noticeably more intelligent than everyone else, they often struggle with those social skills.
Oh, good. Now I have an excuse for my social skills.
I think it's in your case, it's on the other side of the spectrum.
Well, a prime example of this would be Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah.
But back on the original subject, what you mentioned earlier, Boffin, about the situation, that has more power over anything than the people involved in it. Because I'll be sitting in a pub and let's say I'm discussing something with a gentleman and he's just absolutely firm in his beliefs. I will back off and I won't talk to him anymore on any. I basically cut him off. Whereas if it's a pretty girl and I am discussing the same exact thing with her, I'll just brush it aside and change the subject.
Yeah, I think Human kind of touched on something a few minutes ago, Rocket. I think the people that you have more of a emotional investment in, you tend to be more accommodating, more understanding in terms of, trying to understand when they're being unreasonable versus the example you gave, a stranger that you meet in the pub. You really, there's no emotional investment in that person. So it's real easy to disconnect and just ignore them.
Yeah, I think that if you immediately, in a primitive sense, by just what you see or what you feel from the person, if you want to sort of dig into them and have a relationship with them, you will give them a bit more leeway. You'll be a bit more
Yeah.
accommodating and reasonable. But if right from the outset, there's nothing there that attracts you to them whatsoever, all that will keep you there is reasonableness and being sort of open and respectful and polite to each other. But like you said, the guy, you don't want anything from them. They don't sort of visually or primitively look like anything you want or desire. And the moment they're kind of unreasonable and closed-minded with how they're communicating, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to leave you, buddy. Nice, not really nice talking to you, but see you later. Whereas with a woman, there's just a lot of interestingness there, visually or something there, or a look or whatever, and you still want to spend more time there. It's more about you, and you accommodate more, and you're much more, I wouldn't say reasonable, but you're a lot more accommodating before the incompatibility shows itself, that you kind of go, okay, see you later. And I think there's a lot of guys that just don't. They're latched onto the first impression, and they just try as they might to just justify the first impression over and over and over again, and they can't let it go. I kind of, I've often said I find interesting conversations, even if it was with a religious person or even a feminist. I don't care where their firm convictions come from, as long as they can be reasonable with me. And if they can't, then I don't like being there. If I kind of see that there's nothing in the bucket, or if they're not playing tennis with me fairly, then I don't like the ball just being hit at me all the time. I don't like being a punching bag.
Yeah, it's not very entertaining when you're sitting across the table from someone and you perceive very quickly that you're just listening to a script. There is no exchange of ideas. There's no give and take. You're just basically listening to a lecture.
Yeah. But Rocket, you kind of mentioned that. Do you still, with your kind of wisdom, experience, and knowing better, in that moment where someone that's just attractive, just in the superficial sense, are you aware of what you're accommodating? And when does it cut off? And afterwards, do you feel like, why do I waste my time? I knew what she was, and I just stayed there, and I just kind of wasted time. I could have been doing something else, or having a conversation with a buddy, or whatever.
Well, even when there's no pursuit involved, if you look at that person and you find them appealing, you tend to enjoy the conversation more than looking at some old farmer. So I know what I'm getting into. I have an internal discussion going on, and I just kind of brush that aside, and I look for something that I would like discussing with them that we both agree on. So it's not like I'm in pursuit, and I don't care what she says. I'm still in like the judgment phase. I'm still analyzing this person to see if I would actually want to be friends with them or involved more so with them. I kind of bounce around and see what their other opinions are then, if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah, kind of. But like, say more specifically, I'd say if you're at a bar and you see two people in front of you, and one is an intelligent author that you would have a really interesting, deep conversation with, and the other one is a hot bimbo that you're only going to get one thing out of, which would you choose?
I would actually choose the author, but I'm an old guy.
Yeah. Really? I thought you would have said
Yeah.
50-50.
No, I had a great discussion with a guy that was in New Zealand in 1974, and I recognized his accent, and we discussed New Zealand for an hour. And on the other side of me was a pretty bimbo who I know's been after me, but I'm an old guy now. I, I go out to have an enjoyable evening. I don't go out to find a bimbo. I've done enough of that in my life. It's kind of a I'm the wrong guy to ask that question to.
Yeah, I suppose it's different. Like the younger you are, or the less experience you've had in either or, your answer would be different, I suppose.
Or the honest you are.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of one, you're being led by your immediate impulses and instant gratification. You know that the endorphins you're going to experience with the hot bimbo is up here. The endorphins you experience with the intelligent author is going to kind of be this horizontal ambience, like it's going to be spread out over time, whereas this is going to be a skyrocket in a very short amount of time. So it's a very, very different experience that you're choosing. But again, it comes down to what you value. You know, can you refrain from the very short, quick burst of reward compared to kind of, I don't know, it's a bit more like an ambient reward. At least the bimbo is more direct, I guess.
It's back to the situation again. If I ran into authors every day, it would be no big deal. But a hot bimbo comes along every other night. And the author may only be once every decade.
If you were 20, say, because I'm guessing most of you guys would have been intellectually curious. Say, I don't know, around 30, say, late 20s, 30s. You've had a little bit of experience, and then you've got this choice. It's kind of like, I'm interested to know when you could go either way, which one you would choose.
If I was 20, I would ask the hot bimbo if she read the author's book.
Now you're wanting it all, aren't you? Okay, any final thoughts any of you guys have on this subject of arguing with someone who's unreasonable? And I know the answer is kind of to walk away when you see there's nothing there, there's no bridge to be had. But also what I mentioned about are you reasonable yourself? Because I think a lot of people want everyone to be reasonable with their point of view, but they're not reasonable back to them. We've often talked about people's expectations. Oh, this is reasonable. I want this, and all women or all men are like this. It's just so unfair, and everyone's being unreasonable. Why can't I find somebody? Why can't I find friends? Woe is me, victim, victim, victim. So I'd say, are you being reasonable as well? And that leads to self-analysis, self-reflection, really being reasonable with relating to another person. And then if problems arise that you can fix, then you know it's realistic, rather than your kind of little biblical echo chamber of perfect world and then thinking that the world's unreasonable to you. What are your guys' final thoughts on that kind of thing?
I actually think that's a very good point to bring up. I find that a lot of my success with women has to do with the fact that I don't get excited. If we have a difference of opinion, I just remain calm. I don't go into my hyper aggressive mode. I just, and I discuss, I'll ask them, why do you think that way? And it sets people at ease. They don't feel like you're attacking them because of their opinion. You're more interested in why they have that opinion, and a lot of times they'll tell you why they have that opinion. And I think that's a skill I probably developed early on when I was a field engineer and interacting with a lot of customers. And I think that has really helped me when dealing with other people of different, diverse opinions.
Yeah, I'll just follow on from where what Rocket just said and kind of what you said a few minutes ago, Human. I think it's another one of those learned skills. You kind of develop that skill set over the course of your life. You you need to make sure that you're being fair with the person that you're interacting with. And I think you need to really constantly check yourself to make sure that you're being reasonable with your perspective. It's real easy to become emotional when you just allow the situation to take control and drive your behavior. But I think someone who can keep their emotions in check, stay semi-detached from it, and then constantly check their own perspective, I think they'll do well dealing with people in general. And then you have the assurance that if you're in a conflict and you're doing all of those things, I think you can feel good about the fact that it's the other person that's actually being unreasonable and not you.
Mm.
I think that humans' default state is to be unreasonable, and reason is more or less forced into them, where they're being paid to be reasonable when they're either working or doing something that they're remunerated for. And ultimately, we're biological machines. We're not computers. We're not cars. You can't just pluck out a part and then you fix it and you work as intended. So yeah, for me, that's probably the baseline. Just expect people to act like people, and on average, chances are that they'll be unreasonable.
Mm. But don't you think for yourself, say, the more reasonable you are for yourself, your life will be better?
Say that to my fragrance collection and the amount of money that I threw away on it, or
that was due to me as
buying.
well. You can blame me for that.
Well, sure, but look at everything else. Like how many camera lenses you have that you don't use, how many microphones you have that you don't use all at the same time, and they're just gathering dust. Depending on the questions that you ask, there are a lot of elements of being unreasonable in everyone's life.
Yeah, but to what degree is that unreasonable, just superficial? It doesn't really affect my life in a big way. It's not a stumbling block stopping me from doing things that are very important to me. That's just a kind of a nothing distinction to me. Some people might, who want to be perfect in their life, say, yeah, that's exactly a logical point, but I don't kind of think so. I think it's more when you're unreasonable. So Derpa actually, or who was it that mentioned in the comments, they said, getting a bimbo, it's like the old choose your own adventure novels. Remember those? Where you'd be on an adventure and then at the end of the paragraph, it's like, do you choose A or B? And if you go to A, you go to one page, and you go to B, you go to the other page, and you move forward in the adventure. And it's literally like that. How reasonable are you going to be if you have to make a choice where you go forward? And that's the really interesting question for me. If you're being unreasonable and having just standing still and having an intellectual discussion where you're essentially just spinning your wheels, that's very different from being unreasonable that stops you going in a direction that's better for you in the kind of, adventure of your life thing. You know which you assess the choice. Do you choose A or B? Do you choose the author or the bimbo? At this moment, which one will sort of result in something better going forward, or will I regret this? Which one's least likely to be a regrettable decision for yourself?
Both of them can be regrettable decisions. Just
sure,
because
but which one's the less risk? Say,
it's impossible to know.
Which one's okay?
You're just assuming that if you pick the author, you're going to have a better time or a better conversation, and the other one is just going to be a headache. But that may not be the case at all. I think it's impossible to know. That's why I said it doesn't really matter if the choices you make seem reasonable or not. They still have an impact in your life. Take the lenses you don't use. Now you could have a couple of, I don't know, $10,000 extra in your bank, and you could use it for various other things. Yes, at the time they didn't impact you, they don't bother you, and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean you couldn't have made arguably more reasonable decisions with the money that you otherwise would have had right now.
Sure, but the point for me is, say you've got a choice to be made, the bimbo or the author. You don't know. You could have a terrible conversation. If the author is Charles Bukowski, I'm picking the bimbo every time. But if the author is John Steinbeck or, somebody else, which I know, I've read his books, it's different. Again, you have to make a choice. And I see a lot of, say, the internet bubbles. They sit there not making a choice because they're forever looking at the negative results of each. If say you have to pick one, which is the more reasonable choice? So go ahead.
I think that you subtly hinted at the point, but you're going over it, because the main thing is to make a choice.
Yes.
It's not to sit there and not make the choice. The reasonableness ultimately is irrelevant, because you're going to get some kind of result for any choice that you made. The real enemy is not making the choice. You're going to get a good experience or a bad experience, regardless which one of the two you pick. But you do need to pick. If you're constantly avoiding or doing everything that the Manosphere says, don't do X, don't do Y, don't do Z, your experience is always going to remain the same. So I think that the reasonableness of the question is ultimately irrelevant as long as a choice is made.
Yeah, and so it's nice that we've gotten to this point now. So now I kind of see that the reasonableness is a way to assess as many rational good options or negative ones, assessing all of it to be able to make a good choice. But if you're never really interested in making a choice, or you're too afraid, or you're comfortable where you are, it's always going to be a circular intellectual discussion about the dangers and nothing's perfect because nothing is. But if you are really focused on making a choice, then the reasonableness space is a way of assessing which choice is the best to make in this given time.
Yes, exactly. And you can base your choice on previous interactions. If you talked with 40 authors before, like Rocket said, yeah, you can pretty much predict, well, chances are that I'm going to have a good time. I've also talked to 40 bimbos in my life, and maybe I didn't have such a good time. But ultimately, it's still a coin toss. You still don't know what you're going to get. As the famous Forrest Gump said, life is a box of chocolates, and you never know what you're really going to get. And that's pretty much true for any choice that you make.
This has generated I think the next conversation should lead on to the importance of choice, because the reasonableness is one thing that allows you to sort of see more clearly, more objectively, and being able to assess which one is worth choosing and which one is worth discarding. But if you're not focused on having to make a choice, then you won't. And we see it no more online with the current phenomena of wasting your time scrolling on screens, never having to choose anything, but you just get a constant feed of things that you never click on or settle on. It's the debilitation that comes from having a million choices, and you're really paralyzed because you have too much choice. But if you actually, like a lot of people say that maybe religious or do want a family, they're hyper-focused on, I have to make a choice now because I value a family, and a choice needs to be made now. Whereas other people, it's like, I can just continue to select things perpetually, but I'm never really making a choice moving forward. It's almost like a fake circular choice in the moment, where you're just always holding things in your hand and dropping them, holding them in your hand and dropping them, but never grabbing them, owning them, and living with them and going forward in a certain direction. So I think the absence of wanting to choose, like really making that the important focus, is a really good discussion to have.
I agree with that.
For your lens example, if I was more focused in really saying, like, I don't want to waste my money, I want to research much more and find the exact 1 or 2 lenses that will completely fit everything I want to do, rather than enjoying the tinkering with something, which is what I did, and then the result might come to, oh, well, with all my blind tinkering, I fell into, these are the best ones, these are the ones I feel more comfortable with or more useful. I think most people do that. Whereas the other person is like, I want to be frugal, I don't want to throw my money or time away. I'm going to just keep honestly calibrating myself towards a choice and always moving in that direction, and then know what my choice is when I see it, when it's time to buy it, when it's time to get the girlfriend. I recognize what the choice is rather than sampling a lot of things and going around in circles and crossing my fingers and hoping my choice is given to me rather than actually choosing my choice. Does that make sense?
It also reflects back on being reasonable, because it's an analogy for being reasonable. You went through a learning experience with all your lenses, and to have a conversation with another person of an opposite point of view is actually a learning experience. You're going to start to understand
yes
why
and
they
no
think that way.
Yes and no, Rocket. I lean more to Karu. Like, figuratively speaking, I slept around with a lot of lenses and convinced myself that I was searching for the right one and I was learning something. But really, if we use this as an example, I enjoyed sleeping around with a lot of lenses and came to realize which ones were for me through just being promiscuous with lenses.
Now, see, I wouldn't have slept around because of my immaculate value system. But listening to your point of view, I can understand where that sounds reasonable.
Any final thoughts, guys? That was a really reasonable discussion. Interesting, anyway. But yeah, let us know in the comment section, everyone else. I hope I think I got to every super chat, and I think I got to most of the 3 circled comments and smiley face comments. Apologies if I didn't, but the real time conversation is priority aside from the super chats. And yeah, after this, drop into the Gilded server. Give me 5 minutes, but a bunch of people drop in there and extend this conversation. Let me know your thoughts if you've got a microphone. Thanks to the guys for dropping in. Thanks, Karu, for staying up, especially for you. It's the middle of the night for you, isn't it? It's like 4 or 5 in the morning.
Almost 6.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for making time, and thanks to the rest of you guys. And like, subscribe, interact, leave comments. Dislike the video, it doesn't bother me. The AI of YouTube enjoys interaction. So yeah, I'll catch you in the next stream or the next video, and later.